This meal planner has come in really handy. I gave it to my daughter, who's one of the pickiest in our family, and she looked at all the things that she thought she'd be wanting to eat this week, and that's how I planned my week. So we started out with Christmas dinner, which was ham and barbecue pork, and then my daughter picked out pork tamales, which take a little more work, and I wouldn't do these on a normal day, but I'm off this week, so it worked out. And then she wanted salmon, so I went ahead and decided to do like a salmon with Alfredo, like fettuccine Alfredo. The next meal that she wanted was chicken pot pie, which we haven't had for a while, and I had some chicken left over from last week, so I thought that would be a good meal to have this week. Beef tacos was her next choice, and so we're going to do a ground beef. And then for Saturday, since it's New Year's Eve, I bought a bunch of finger food type things, and I bought some frozen chicken wings. I thought I would do some barbecue chicken wings, so we'd have a bunch of little finger foods to eat that night. For Christmas dinner, we had barbecue beef ribs and a honey glazed ham. So the first thing I did was cut it apart so that I could put it in my pressure cooker and get them tender. I seasoned them on both sides with a dry rub before I put them in the pressure cooker. After adding water to my pressure cooker, I added the ribs, and then I put it on high pressure for 30 minutes. While that was cooking away, I made a honey brown sugar glaze to put on the ham. This was a fully cooked ham, I just needed to warm it thoroughly. So I glazed the ham, covered it, put it in the oven, and then went on to do some of my other things. So the ribs were done, and I pulled them out and I transferred them to a baking dish. But before I put them in the oven, I did spread some barbecue sauce on them. Then we cut and boiled the potatoes, and I got the frozen green beans ready to steam to go with everything. So I pulled the ham out, and it was not quite done, so I flipped it and stuck it back in. By this time my ribs were done, so we turned our attention to finishing the mashed potatoes, and my kids helped me with these. So we added some half and half to make it nice and creamy, and then a few spices to go in it. I unfortunately forgot to take a picture of this meal. So I do not claim to be amazing at cooking authentically, but this is the best that I could do for these pork tamales. I've made them several times after I was shown by a friend who was from Mexico, and they usually turn out pretty good. So first you have to make the dough to wrap the meat in, and I used a lard for this one because I was going to be sharing it with dairy-free family, but butter is also really good. Then you add your Masa, which is that kind of corn flour that you can get in the Hispanic food section at your regular grocery store, and then chicken broth is what I added next. And this chicken broth really got soaked up, so it made a pretty good looking dough. The recipe said to get kind of a hummus consistency with your dough, and then that would be the right consistency. So I needed to add about 1.5 cups of chicken broth to get that consistency. I forgot to mention that I got the pork going in my pressure cooker as well, and it was cooking away while I was making the dough. And then I also went ahead and started soaking the corn husks that you'll need to wrap the tamales in. So my pork got done, and I pulled it out and started taking off some of the chunks of fat and shredding it up, and I realized I needed a bowl. So I switched it to a bowl. Then you add your enchilada sauce at that time and get it nice and mixed up and ready to put in the dough. All right, this is a top view of how the process works. You get your corn husk, you put a little bit of dough in it, press it down. I put a little water on my finger so the dough wouldn't stick. Put a little meat in it, and then you kind of fold it together and squish the top and fold the bottom. Here's kind of a side view. If your corn husks are too small, you just put two together. And then you put a big scoop of, it was probably like 1/4 of a cup. Put the dough down and just press it out, and then add a couple tablespoons, 1 to 2 tablespoons of the meat, and then you fold it. Just kind of squish the top and bottom so the meat's sealed in there. And there's one more example that I showed you. So it's kind of a process, and it's definitely not something that I would do on a regular weeknight, but since I didn't have to work this week, it worked out fine. And it makes quite a few, so I was able to give some to a sick friend, and we were able to eat on them for quite a while. Now there are a couple ways you can cook these tamales. You can steam them, and I have this steaming basket that goes in my stock pot, but I never done it in the crock pot or the Instant Pot before, so I went ahead and tried that too. And it was okay. It didn't save a ton of time, but it saved a little bit. Everybody in my family loves tamales, but unfortunately they're a lot of work, so I don't make them all the time. The next meal was the salmon. So we started by making our own salmon seasoning. Added a few different spices and some breadcrumbs, some lemon zest, a little bit of Parmesan. Then we started the noodles, got those going. I chose fettuccine for this meal. And I got some of the melting butter from the pan that I was gonna make the sauce in, and I put that on the fillets, and then I put the seasoning on and a lemon juice and a little more breadcrumbs. And then we put that to bake while we made the Alfredo sauce, which is butter and flour. Make a roux to start. Then you're gonna add your liquid. We did milk and a little bit of cream, I think. And mix that up so that there's no lumps. Salt it and season it. I think we put in a few extra seasonings, but you do not have to. You could just salt it and add the cheese. And once the noodles were done, I drained those, and then I add a little bit of olive oil to keep them from sticking together. And while the sauce was cooking, my daughter was helping me with the sauce, I went ahead and got the big container of baby power greens and got those sauteed up, which were really yummy with the fish and the pasta. And it was a quick, easy way to have a vegetable. So the fish got done, and then we added the cheese last, right before serving, to the Alfredo sauce. And I just went ahead and put greens on mine and sauce and my salmon, and it turned out really good. I'm not a huge pasta fan, and I don't like to have pasta very often, but once in a while, it hits the spot. Now this is optional, but for the tacos, I wanted to make my restaurant style salsa. So I put the ingredients together and blended that up. So we had a little salsa, fresh salsa to go with our tacos tonight. And once that was all ready to go, after adding a little salt and lime, Little cumin. I put it aside and got cooking the meat. Doesn't that look amazing? Oh, nope, just kidding. Before I started cooking the meat, I was out of my homemade taco seasonings. So I had a lady that had shared this recipe with me, and it was just homemade taco seasoning, and you can store it and use it whenever you need it. So I was refilling mine. I ran out of cumin though, so I didn't quite get the right amount in there, but it was good enough. So I put that in a storage container and saved it for when it was time to season the meat. And even though the meat has onion powder, or the season has onion powder in it, I went ahead and sauteed some onion with this meat just to give it more flavor and texture. So once that meat is brown, it was a 90-10 ground beef, so I did take some of the grease out. Then I added my homemade seasoning and water, stirred it around, and then you're gonna cover it and let it, bring it to a boil and then let it simmer for 15 or 20 minutes, depending on how much liquid you like in it. And then pick the toppings that you and your family like. This is what we chose tonight. And I went ahead and made up my taco and put some lettuce and olives, cheese, tomatoes, guacamole, and some nacho cheese too. We just happened to have it, so I used both kinds of cheeses. And then we had these seasoned corn shells that ended up, some of them broke, so I just crunched one up and put it inside the soft shell. Why not, right? And it was really yummy. I absolutely love taco night. This is the best chicken pot pie recipe that we got out of an old cookbook. We got at a yard sale years ago, before Pinterest, and we love it. We still use it to this day. So I started by blending up cold butter in my flour mixture. Then I added an egg and some ice cold water. And then after I blended it again, I realized it needed just a little more, so I added a little more, one more blend. And after I blended this, I kind of pinched the crumbs together to see if they'd stick, and then I knew it was about done. So I put it, I dumped it out onto a piece of plastic and kind of pushed it all together, and I did end up needing to add just a little bit more water to that. Made it in like a disc shape and covered it and put it in the fridge for an hour. In the meantime, I made, my lighting was so bad, sorry about that. But anyway, I made the kind of the gravy chicken pot pie filling with some sauteed onion and thyme, which is like the secret ingredient, is that thyme. And then it calls for cream and chicken broth, flour and cornstarch to thicken, and then paprika. It's also another secret ingredient. And I actually added a potato to this one, which I don't normally do. It doesn't call for it in the recipe, but I would have steamed the potato for a minute or two in the microwave because they just were a little crunchy after they were done baking. But then you add your milk mixture, and mine was just a little thick, so I added a little more chicken broth, and your frozen carrots and peas and salt and pepper. A little more chicken broth because it's still just a little thick. And then I added my chicken. Now, if you want to save on dishes, you could definitely put the pie crust over the top of that if you have a cast iron pan that you can put in the oven. But I transferred mine to a baking dish, and then I pulled the dough out and rolled it out and got it ready to put on top of the pie filling. Now this crust is so flaky and delicious. It is so yummy. The last few times I've made this recipe, I've used biscuits on top just to save time. So that's one way you can do it, but this crust is definitely worth it if you have the time. So I cut the edges off And as you can see, there's a few little spots that were needing to be patched. So I took some of the dough and just patched it up. Then I fluted the edges. And then I cut a slit in the middle so it would have a place to bubble. But it did end up bubbling out the edges a little bit. I did an egg wash on it, and then I put it in the oven. And when it's golden brown, it's ready to serve. With all that was going on for New Year's Eve, this was all I managed to record. But we had tons of great food, but this was a simple, easy kind of appetizer slash main dish to have that night. So easy, just frozen chicken wings with barbecue sauce, and then about 3 or 4 hours into cooking, take out that extra liquid, add a little more barbecue sauce, cook for a little longer till it's nice and well incorporated and glazed over. And you have a delicious meal. In fact, when I took this video, we had already eaten half of the wings, so they turned out really good and it was a wonderful night. Happy New Year's and thanks for watching.